It begins with a crash on a quiet Kansas road. On October 20, 2018, Police Chief Timothy Dean lost control of his vehicle and drove off the road outside Wichita. Another officer passing by noticed the wreck and pulled over to help. Dean, the chief of police from Sunray, Texas, appeared calm. He told the officer he was fine, that help was on the way, and that he was simply traveling to New York to visit a friend. But what the officer could not have known at that moment was that Timothy's trip was not casual, nor was it innocent. In the vehicle with him were multiple handguns, an assault rifle, a shotgun, and body armor. He was not heading toward New York to catch up with anyone. He was heading there with a target in mind. 2 days later, on October 22nd, police in Sodus, New York were called to a scene that would shake the entire community. In a quiet driveway, under the shadow of a pickup truck, lay the body of Joshua Niles, shot dead in front of his own home. In the driver's seat of another vehicle parked in the same driveway was his girlfriend, Amber Washburn. She too had been shot and killed. In the back seat of her car sat her young child, miraculously alive and unharmed, spared from the violence but left with a memory no child should ever carry. The brutality of the attack was chilling, but one detail stood out immediately to investigators: the precision. The shot that killed Amber went straight through her windshield and struck her with a level of accuracy suggesting the gunman was no stranger to firearms. A neighbor told police what they had seen. A masked man had walked up to Joshua as he worked on his truck, pulled out a gun, and opened fire. Amber pulled into the driveway at that very moment, and the shooter turned on her instantly, ending her life in seconds. It was an ambush, executed with a cold and practiced hand. Whoever carried out the attack had not just come to frighten or intimidate, they had come to kill. Detectives began to piece together the possible motive. Joshua Niles had recently won a bitter custody battle against his ex-girlfriend Charlene Childers. A judge had awarded him full custody after determining that Charlene's home was unsafe for the children. Losing her children had devastated Charlene, and investigators quickly realized she had reason to want Joshua out of the way. And there was another detail that raised alarms. Charlene was married to none other than Timothy Dean, the police chief with a history of violence. He himself had been entangled in a custody dispute after a disturbing video surfaced, showing him striking his own daughter. The connections between the bitter custody fight, Charlene's anger, and Timothy's proximity to the murders began to look less like coincidence and more like motive. When police brought Charlene in for questioning, she presented herself as calm but troubled, feigning confusion. She explained that she and Timothy were in the middle of a divorce, that he was living in Texas, and that she had no reason to believe he was in New York. She admitted he had called her from a restricted number, asking about the murders after seeing news articles she had shared online. But detectives pressed harder. How would Timothy, living in Texas, have just stumbled upon the details of a small-town double homicide in New York? And why was Charlene renting cars for him, helping him travel, and offering rides across state lines? As the interview went on, Charlene tried to distance herself from suspicion. She admitted that Joshua and she had a toxic past. She alleged that he abused her during their relationship, and she claimed that Timothy had only ever joked about wanting to fight Joshua if the chance arose. "He's not that type of person," she said of her husband. "He wouldn't kill someone unless it was on the job," but her words rang hollow against the evidence. She had already admitted to giving Timothy a ride, helping him rent a car, and speaking with him just before and after the murders. Every explanation she gave tangled her further into the investigation. Detectives knew she wasn't telling the full truth, and they weren't about to let her slip through their fingers. At one point, Charlene broke. She admitted that in moments of anger, she and Timothy had fantasized about Joshua's death. She confessed to telling Timothy that life would be easier if Joshua just died in a ditch somewhere. When detectives asked if she ever told her husband to kill Joshua, she admitted, "Yeah, we talked about it. I said, just shoot him. Get him out of my life." She insisted she hadn't meant it, that it was nothing more than venting. But her words had power, and Timothy, desperate to prove his devotion, had listened. He had taken her anger as permission, perhaps even as a command. This was no longer a question of whether Timothy had motive. The question now was whether Charlene was the mastermind. Investigators began to realize the dynamic: a persuasive and manipulative woman, furious over losing her children, and a police chief with tactical training, armed to the teeth and hopelessly in love with her. Together, they formed a dangerous alliance, one with the power to kill. But Charlene wasn't finished playing the victim. She insisted that she thought Timothy was simply driving north to cool off, maybe even to see his kids from a distance. She claimed she never believed he would actually pull the trigger. Yet detectives weren't buying it. They pointed out her lies, how she said she had picked him up at a motel when security footage showed he left with an Uber driver instead, how she said he rented a car at night when records proved it was during the day. Her story was crumbling, and she knew it. Backed into a corner, she admitted again that she had vented about wanting Joshua gone. But she still tried to deny her deeper involvement. That defense would not hold for long. Detectives were patient, and the evidence was stacking up. Charlene was no bystander. She was the spark, and soon she would be exposed as the one who had set Timothy Dean on a deadly path that ended in blood on a driveway in Sodus, New York. Back in Texas, the man at the center of the storm was finally cornered. Police arrested Timothy Dean at his home and transported him to an interrogation room. The former police chief sat across from seasoned detectives who had come all the way from New York. They weren't there to ask if he committed the murders of Joshua Niles and Amber Washburn. They were there to ask why. From the very beginning, Timothy denied everything. He told detectives he left home simply to get away, to disappear, even hinting that he had been contemplating suicide. He admitted turning off his phone so no one could track him, but when pressed on why he had traveled with body armor, multiple guns, and tactical gear, his answers fell flat. He insisted he never had a plan, that he was just going. Detectives were not fooled. They confronted him with video evidence, witness descriptions, and rental car records. "You were wearing the same jacket we saw in surveillance," one detective said sharply. "The same green hat, the same gear. You think it's just coincidence?" But Timothy stayed firm, repeating over and over that he hadn't done it. This is where the psychological warfare began. Detectives deployed the classic good cop/bad cop strategy, switching from calm persuasion to brutal confrontation. One officer leaned in, his tone dripping with contempt. "You're not a tactical operator. You're a small-town cop, a coward who couldn't even keep a job. You killed a man under his truck, and you shot a woman in front of her child. And now you're sitting here lying to us like you've lied to everyone else in your life." Another detective slammed harder. "Do you think 5 detectives from New York drove down here for no reason? You're caught, Tim. This isn't about whether you did it. It's about whether you have the courage to admit it, or whether you'll keep hiding behind lies until your daughter grows up knowing her father is nothing but a monster." But Timothy stayed locked down. The accusations rolled off him, even when they tried to provoke him directly. At one point, an investigator leaned across the table and spat. Timothy stared back but didn't budge. Detectives tried another angle. Sympathy. They told him they understood he had been manipulated, that Charlene had twisted his emotions and pushed him into a corner. "She's not contacting you this week, Tim," one detective warned. "She's up there in New York, putting it all on you. She's cutting a deal while you sit here trying to protect her. Don't you see what's happening? You're the pawn, and she's the queen. She played you." But Timothy refused to take the bait. Instead of cracking, he repeated his request for a lawyer. Detectives tried again. "You're not even under arrest for murder right now, Tim. Do you even know the law? You think you're smarter than everyone else. You thought you could drive to New York, shoot 2 people in broad daylight, and get away with it. But you're not that smart, are you?" Still, his answers were evasive, calculated. He avoided admitting guilt, avoided showing emotion, avoided giving them anything they could use. The room grew heavier as hours passed. Detectives told him that most suspects, when faced with overwhelming evidence, eventually admitted what they had done. They asked him directly, "Are you sorry Josh and Amber got killed?" Timothy's answer was chilling. "I'm sorry when anyone gets killed," he replied. "Not sorry for Joshua. Not sorry for Amber. Just anyone." The lack of remorse struck investigators like ice. It was the answer of a man unwilling, or unable, to face the human cost of his actions. Meanwhile, Charlene's role was becoming clearer. She had already told police that she once begged Timothy to just shoot Josh, insisting she hadn't meant it. But when detectives pressed further, she admitted that before the murders, she helped Timothy prepare. She was there when he packed his arsenal of weapons, his tactical gear, and his extra clothes. She helped him secure the rental car, ensuring his name wasn't on the paperwork. She even told him what to wear. Every step, she was involved. As Timothy sat in Texas denying the undeniable, Charlene was in New York, beginning to turn. Her story had cracks, and prosecutors knew how to push them wider. They reminded her that the car rental couldn't have been just for work. They showed her the evidence of her conversations with Timothy about killing Josh. Piece by piece, the mask fell away. She finally admitted the truth. She wanted Joshua gone. She wanted her kids back. She had told Timothy to kill him, and though she still tried to frame it as just anger and desperation, her words carried the weight of planning and intent. "I told him, look, you just need to do it," Charlene confessed. "I'm done seeing my kids cry. I'm done with this. Just get it done." Her words painted the picture investigators already suspected. Charlene Childers had been the mastermind. Timothy Dean had been the weapon. Together, they had executed a plan that left 2 people dead in a driveway, a child scarred for life, and a community reeling. But the story was not over. Detectives had Charlene's confession, but they still needed her to testify in court. The question now was, how far would she go to save herself? And what price would Timothy pay when she finally gave prosecutors everything they needed? Charlene Childers had been sitting in jail for days, weighing her options, when she finally decided to make her move. She told her attorney she was ready to talk, ready to cooperate with prosecutors. But there was a catch. If she wanted any chance of seeing her children again, she needed a deal. Detectives brought her back in, this time with her lawyer present. They didn't sugarcoat anything. "You're not going to walk away from this," they warned. "You will have to admit to being an accomplice. You will have to admit you were part of the plan to kill Joshua Niles and Amber Washburn. But if you're honest, if you give us the truth, you might avoid dying in prison." Charlene hesitated, then began to unravel the entire plan. She admitted that when Timothy said he was going to New York, she already knew what that meant. She admitted helping him rent the car, making sure his name wasn't on the paperwork. She admitted being with him while he packed his arsenal, his AR rifle, his shotgun, his handguns, his magazines, even his police-issued sidearm that he had taken from the Sunray Police Department. He wasn't just going on a trip, he was preparing for war. "He came to my house in Sunray," Charlene said. "He loaded everything up, his gear, his weapons, his armor, and he said he was going to drive to New York and shoot Josh. It was chilling, but it didn't stop there." She confessed that she encouraged him. She told Timothy that she was tired of crying, tired of her children crying, tired of Joshua controlling her life from across the country. She told him to just get it done. And he listened. He believed her. He loved her enough, or was manipulated enough, to become her weapon. Even then, Charlene still tried to protect herself, painting Timothy as unstable and insisting she never thought he would follow through. But prosecutors didn't need her to look innocent. They only needed her testimony against Timothy Dean. With her confession secured, they offered her a deal. Testify truthfully about Timothy's role, and she could avoid a life sentence. It was a calculated betrayal. For Timothy, who had already sacrificed everything, his career, his freedom, his future, Charlene's testimony was the final blow. In court, the prosecution laid out the story with brutal clarity. Timothy Dean, once a police chief sworn to uphold the law, had driven across the country armed to the teeth. He had ambushed Joshua Niles in his own driveway and murdered Amber Washburn in cold blood as her child sat helpless in the back seat. He did it not out of madness, but out of devotion to a manipulative woman who promised him love if he helped her get her children back. Charlene testified, admitting her role. She explained how she and Timothy had talked about Joshua dying, how she encouraged him, how she helped him prepare. She didn't hold the gun that day, but her fingerprints were all over the plan. The jury listened. The verdict was inevitable. Charlene Childers was sentenced to 28 years in prison after accepting her plea deal. For her, it meant the faint possibility of freedom in her later years, though she will never again be the mother her children once knew. But for Timothy Dean, there was no such mercy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, forever branded as a murderer. forever remembered as the police chief who crossed the line from protector to predator. The prosecution made it clear. Timothy was the one who pulled the trigger, but it was Charlene who had set the plan in motion. She avoided a life sentence by betraying him, leaving him to spend the rest of his days behind bars while she clung to the hope of eventual release. And so the story ended, not with justice that felt entirely balanced, but with a grim reminder of how love, obsession, and manipulation can twist lives beyond recognition. 2 parents were dead, a child would grow up without them, and the people responsible were a police chief and his wife, proof that even those sworn to protect can become the greatest threat. Do you think Charlene Childers deserved the same sentence as Timothy Dean? Or was the deal she struck the only way to guarantee justice? If you found this story as shocking as we did, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. Hit the like button if you believe justice was served, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because in the end, cases like this remind us of one haunting truth. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones hiding behind badges, promises, and love.